Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 145 of the Best Games Period. I am your host, Jack Gardner, and with me this week is the incredible returning friend of the show, Kazuma Hashimoto.
Howdy, everybody.
Howdy, howdy, howdy. Okay, I had to check to make sure that I got the episode number right, and I did, and I'm very proud of myself right now.
That's good. I'm glad.
Yeah, how have you been? It's been a hot minute since you've been on the show. Last time we talked was in September for our Final Fantasy XIV episode.
Yeah, we talked about that, didn't we?
We certainly did.
Yeah.
And in that vein, you are now back to talk about a different Final Fantasy game, Final Fantasy XII.
Yes.
Yeah, but maybe before we get into that, is there, like, are there interesting projects that you're working on that you want to talk about, or, like, industry news that you feel strongly about at all?
Nothing I can really talk about, like that isn't under NDA right now, so yeah. I've been doing my thing, hanging out, streaming and stuff, which has been going really well. Just in general, playing a lot of new games. I played through Bot and Kaitos recently and Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles, and they've just been kind of like, just doing things. Going to the gym. That's a big thing. I've been going to the gym. Yeah. I woke up and was like, oh, my knees hurt. I should start going to the gym so my body doesn't hurt so much all the time.
That's way too rational for going to the gym thinking.
Oh, well, I mean, also because I want to have, like, a better legs and butt, just for reasons.
I mean, again, way too rational. I don't understand.
Yeah, so that's kind of like my big thing is I've been going to the gym. I've also been eating healthier, just engaging with more healthy aspects of, like, my life and living, which has been really good for me personally, and I'm just trying to keep that good mental health vibe and everything going just to start the new year and just stick with it for maybe the rest of my life.
I mean, I hear once you get it down into a routine, it's way easier to stick with.
Yeah, it can be. So right now I'm going to the gym like 2 to 3 times a week in the morning before I stream, and it has me feeling really energized for streaming, and it has also opened up my appetite, so I'm eating more than I've ever eaten in my life, and I'm feeling really good, and like I actually have like the thought process to do all the things I need to throughout the day, so it's been good. It's been good.
Well, good.
Yeah.
I'm proud of you.
Thank you.
And you also were telling me before this show recording started that you joined a stream team.
Yeah, I'm now part of the Rainbow Arcade Twitch team, and Rainbow Arcade is a really cool Twitch team that has basically comprised itself of LGBTQ plus inclusive streamers of all shapes and sizes, and of all orientations and ethnicities, and it's really cool to be part of them. I'm a much smaller streamer than a lot of the people in there, so I was very surprised.
For now.
Yeah, for now. Yeah, you're right. I've been having some channel growth, so it's been pretty nice. But, yeah, so it was really cool that they, like, got back to me. They're like, hey, by the way, like, we accepted you and everything, and I got that on my birthday, and I was like, wow, this is really awesome, cool. So now I'm part of this really cool community full of other LGBTQ plus streamers and everything. And it's just an honor to, like, be alongside them and be a part of this community and, like, create, like, a good space for other LGBTQ plus people on Twitch. Because everyone knows that online communities can be super rough for, well, minorities in general. So it's nice to have this space where, like, people feel like they can go to and feel heard and listened to and just can, like, hang out, like, in their own comfort, you know?
Yeah. That's awesome. And one more time, what was that what was the stream team in case people want to check it out?
They are called Rainbow Arcade, and you can also find them on Twitter at RNBW_arcade.
All right. Check it out, people. Yeah. And what do you think that Tim Sweeney reigniting kind of the whole get politics out of your games debacle? Have you been hearing anything about that?
I don't know who that is, but he can lick my ass.
I think
Sorry.
he is the head honcho at Epic Games.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, it's
Um,
corporations and shit, but it is what it is. Like, people will say whatever they want, but they can't deny that politics are part of games. Like, even Epic Games, like, their biggest, like, release, Fortnite, has classism inherently baked into it with its microtransactions and, like, its cosmetics and everything, and how, like, that's been kind of, like, used as leverage for, like, kids in middle school and high school to, like, double down and buy things in their game. Like, whether or not he wants to accept it or acknowledge it, it's always going to be there, so whatever, fuck him, who cares?
he did try and clarify later that what he meant was he wanted political messaging in games to come from the hearts of developers and not the capitalist not marketing departments trying to capitalize on political messaging.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like that's a pretty naive way to look at it when marketing departments have always done that. Like
Exactly.
that's what a marketing department is for.
Exactly. Like, people kind of forget that, like, the pink dollar exists and, like, what that means. For those of you that don't know what the pink dollar is, though, I assume most people who will be listening to this podcast do. It's basically when corporations market specifically to LGBT plus people and whatnot, in hopes to get their dollar to, buy their video game or buy their purchase. And it's always been part of marketing, at least within, like, the past, like, 20 years or so. And it's just kind of, like, still there, and it's, again, like, bare minimum representation, and they want you to, like, buy that shit and celebrate it, and it's just garbage.
Yeah, it's the whole Star Wars thing of like, oh,
The two
we're
blurry
gonna have...
lesbians kissing in the
Yeah.
background. Come see our movie.
Exactly.
Don't you want to be gay in Assassin's Creed Odyssey? Oh wait, we're gonna make you straight by default either way.
Like,
Fuck.
I know some people who went to see Star Wars excited for that and were horribly disappointed. And I think you bring up a good point about how a lot of the systems that people don't inherently look at for political messaging are doing that regardless. Whether that is through how the game is monetized or through just the way the in-game economy. It doesn't even have to be with real-world money. How the in-game economy works. I've actually been wondering for a while, like, what would a video game look like if you were to design it with a communist attitude towards sharing goods? You know,
That would be probably Albion Online.
I have no knowledge of that game, so do
Albion
tell.
Online is a completely community-driven MMO, as in all the players make the food, plant, like, all the vegetables and everything, skin the animals, craft the leathers, everything, right? All of that is all community-driven. Everything is made by the community. And at first, these communities are really great, right? Because everyone's relying on each other. People are, like, basically selling their services as mercenaries to get goods ferried from town to town, because you literally have to physically take your wares from another town to sell them there. But then it becomes, oh, I am of the merchant class. I have a lot of money. Now I will exploit the lower class, and it pulls everything out of balance, and it just falls into the same thing, unfortunately. Like, I've seen it happen in plenty of MMOs where this ends up happening with player-driven or player-based communities. But you should definitely check out Albion Online at, its early time, because it's only been out for, like, a year or so. And check out how the economy was in that game and how it was in the early game and what the developers had planned for it versus, like, what it is now.
Yeah, I'm even talking like removing. What would it look like if you removed kind of that capitalistic structure of, like, accumulating wealth in games?
Like having, like, a bartering system?
Like having a bartering system, or, like, kind of, like, I guess to simplify what I'm trying to get across, but, like, implementing the philosophy of, like, to each according to his ability and need. I butchered that, but, like, that the saying that kind of undergirds communism, right? So, like, upturning this expectation of gathering wealth, which has been baked into games since like Mario Brothers and like collecting things in platformers.
Well, it's just baked into like anything, like even like your tabletop RPG. What is your first goal as an adventurer? I'm gonna go on an adventure and I'm gonna find loot, and that's like the most simple storytelling element ever. And like, it's hard to imagine anything moving away from that because that has always been the objective. But I think given the opportunity, if developers were allowed to explore this concept and implement it in ways that were fully functional, I think it'd be very interesting to see. But again, like, that would also rely on the people, for example, in an MMO, adhering to this system and not giving something some sort of capital value, and then basically creating capitalism within the game itself.
Right. Yeah, I think it's one of those things that would be a really interesting challenge, and I don't have an answer on how to deal with it, right? Mm-hmm. But like, I know in like my most recent homebrew setting for a tabletop game, I do have like a nation that works that way. Mm-hmm. It's not even really a nation; it's a loose confederacy of like anarchist communes, essentially. And their economy is really weird. So just I would like to see more exploration of like political messaging in economies of video games, I guess is what I'm saying. That a really niche request. I know, but like I think that would be interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so too. For those of you that don't know what's going on in video games and economics, you can check out the class war in Fallout 76 if you want to see some actual eat the rich action. Literally eating the rich.
Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay, you cut out for a second, but
probably because my washing machine got really loud, so my noise cancellation thing like hit in. Yeah, studio apartments, okay. You know.
Well, right now it's a recording studio apartment.
Oh.
But gosh, I'm sorry. I'm in a mood today, I guess.
A good mood. You sound full of cheer and mirth.
A good mood. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm like a mirthy piñata. I don't know where I was going
Shower
with that.
Jack
anyway,
with compliments and she will burst with mirth.
Gosh, I got super thoughty on social media last night, and I apologize.
Don't apologize for anything.
Final Fantasy XII
is
a game.
It is.
I am told.
Perhaps it is.
It happens to be a Square Enix game, which is, I guess, pretty cool.
It can be, yes.
And it is also one of those games that has so many different release dates. It originally came out in 2006, and then again in 2007, and then again in 2017, and then again in 2018, and again in 2019. Yeah, we are specifically... I realized that we could do this... with this episode. We are doing a first on the best games period. We are tackling a game that we have previously discussed. However, we were discussing the base version of Final Fantasy XII, and in this episode we're going to be talking about the Zodiac Age version of Final Fantasy XII.
It really doesn't add much of anything other than cool new gameplay stuff to make the game more accessible and way less time intensive.
Yeah, way less time intensive indeed. Some might even say 2 to 4 times less time intensive.
I'm so happy about that, by the way. So, for those of you that don't know about the Zodiac Age edition of the game, I also wrote a review of this, by the way, for RPG Site. The Switch port is the port that I will recommend to everybody because not only can you speed up combat 2 to 4 times, you can also change your job without any repercussion for free at any given time in the game once you unlock your job. So you don't have to go back and respec because perhaps you ended up making Vana white mage, and you made Penelo white mage, and you have one too many white mages, and you can't beat Yasmat, and everything is a disaster, and you don't know what's going on. So, if you have not played Final Fantasy XII, and you want to play Final Fantasy XII after listening to this podcast, and you have a Switch, please consider picking up the Switch version of the game. If not, the PC and the PS4 version are also good, but they do not have the same leniency where you can switch your job at any given time. So remember, that game plays for
and
keeps.
They don't have times 4 speed.
They only have times two, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I have to confess, anytime I was going through a dungeon or running through to get from point A to point B when there wasn't fast travel options, I was in times 4 speed, and it was pretty much the best thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't understand. After having played it that way, I don't understand how I had enough patience to play this originally without any kind of time modification.
Well, you have to consider that when this came out for us the first time, we were a lot younger, so we had a lot more time. Like, I was in middle school when this came out the first time.
Yeah.
And I had all the time in the world to play this game.
Oh, am I older than you?
I think so. By like maybe a year or something. Maybe.
Yeah, I was in high school when this game came out.
Yeah, I was in
first year, second year.
I was about to hit high school.
Anyway,
yeah.
Beside the point. Yeah, I know we had a lot more time, but anytime I had to switch back into normal speed for combat reasons, it was painfully slow. Like, incredibly painfully slow. I don't know if it just didn't feel like that, or if like my perception of time changed because of how often I was in a sped up mode.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm kind of torn. I don't know if that speaks well of the game's combat systems or not.
So for me, as someone who has played this game like 5 or 6 times to completion, I love the fact that you can speed things up, right? Mostly because of the gambit system and how the gambit system works, and I really love the gambit system. If I really want to spend time with the game, then I will actually take that time speed off, or if I'm having like a headache that night, or that up speed is giving me motion sickness, then I'm happy that I can turn that off, even if it takes me longer to get through the game.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Like, I get motion sick really easily, so when you're doing that times 4 speed and you're swinging the camera around, the camera moves, like, times 4 speed, and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna throw up. But, yeah, I think the gambit system works really well, especially if you just want to have, like, characters literally walk themselves, like, around the field and fight, basically. But I think having this times 2 speed up, times 4 speed up, is just better for RPGs in general, not just Final Fantasy XII, because a lot of adults that are playing these games don't necessarily have the time to invest in games that require grinding. Like, I just got done playing Baten Kaitos, which is a game from 2003, and I'm lucky that I have the time to grind in those games because I stream that game. Or it would have taken me a lot longer to beat that game because some fights are just so frustrating and you have to grind at some points to get specific cards to level up, basically, or to have better skills. And it's just like, there was this whole era of like RPGs that released, and 12 was in that era where like grinding was kind of like a mandatory thing. And again, this era where people thought game length equals like more quality game, and that's kind of what we have stepped away from. And RPGs that are getting re-released now have also stepped away from that, realizing, hey, the people that are buying our remasters are probably in their 30s now or in their late 20s, and they don't have time for this. Or maybe they're even teenagers that don't have time for this because of heavy school schedules, or they just want to do other shit, you know? So I think it more speaks to just like a changing attitude about RPGs, and a very good changing attitude where a game doesn't have to be 70 hours long. You can just speed up that process in between and just hit those cutscenes. Because I've been playing Yakuza 7, and that game, I really like it, and it's really fun, and it has that old RPG system, but you can only auto-battle, and that turns off every time you enter a new battle, basically.
Okay.
and you have to level for like quite a while to hit certain like level like caps for boss fights and things like that, and then you get hit with like 40-minute cutscenes and then 4 hours of leveling and then 40-minute cutscenes, and you're just left super fatigued.
Okay. Yeah. I hear what you're saying. I don't know. I compare a lot of my Final Fantasy experiences to Final Fantasy IX,
Mm-hmm.
and I feel like that combat system or something about the way that that game was balanced
Mm-hmm.
made the combat feel more consequential, and I'm not really sure how to put my finger on that. Because like a lot of the time I was just not paying attention to anything because I got my gambits fine tuned and could just run through an area, kill a bunch of things, level up a little bit. I wound up doing a bunch of side quests, and I finished the game like 20 levels over leveled, and like my characters could literally like three-shot a boss with their spells, and I from a gameplay perspective, I remember really liking the gambit system, and there's never really been anything like that again. But in a sped up mode, I don't know. I remember the first time I played it, I didn't have any gambits turned on for Vaughn, who is kind of like the main character for me in that first playthrough. And so it felt a lot more interactive. But turning the gambits on for everybody felt more like an auto battler, I guess.
Yeah, and again, I don't think anything's wrong with auto battling. There is a stigma in like the RPG community about auto battling, but I think in this case, like, you can choose how you want to play Final Fantasy XII. I never have my main character with like gambits, but I fine tune everybody else's gambits, and I sort of give commands like as I will. And yeah, like the main story stuff, like if you level up and do some side hunts, like you'll be fine. But if you want to do stuff like Yasmat, like that fight, if you're unlucky, can take like 4 hours, like not sped up. So there are some challenges you can find in the game that you obviously can't like fiddle around with gambits, or you can even do like, the really long trial tower you fight the 5 judges at the top, and I've seen people do that with like level 1 Vaughn, and they're literally menuing for like 2 hours, like doing that. I think 12 has this ability with its system to do a lot of really different and cool things if you're like into speedrunning or challenge modes and stuff like that. But I think like you really have to like feel the gambit system or like the gambit system in order to do that, and I don't think it's for everybody, definitely, because all Final Fantasy games kind of play differently, and like usually like there's one that sticks with you and one that doesn't. Like Final Fantasy IX, I don't like the combat in that at all. But like for example, 10 is actually my favorite combat system next to 12. Yeah.
Okay. I haven't played that one yet.
10?
That
one's really good.
I've played 10 too, but I never played 10.
10's really good. After you play 10, you should give 10-2 another try too, because 10-2 and 10 together tell a really, really good story, I think.
And I also, just from my memories of 10-2, I feel like it's the gayest Final Fantasy.
Yeah, it's basically Final Fantasy 15, but like 3 lesbians on a road trip. Or 2 lesbians and like 1 bisexual on a road trip. Yeah, it's again like if you want to have your Final Fantasy 15, but like not just being a boys' club, because Final Fantasy developers think that men shouldn't be able to cast magic or healing magic because that's too feminine, then go play Final Fantasy 10-2 instead, and you can have a fun dress-up time, anyone can do whatever they want, and you don't have to deal with that kind of misogyny.
Also, the sphere grid is amazing.
Oh yeah, the dress spheres and stuff?
I really liked it.
The dress spheres are really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wish that was a staple of all Final Fantasy games, just because it's really fun to play dress up with your characters.
Yeah.
I said it.
And I
said it and I meant it.
Yeah, no, it's really cool. And also like, so before 12 was coming out, I used to buy like the PlayStation magazines like religiously because they'd have like the demo game discs, right? And I bought the one for 12 because I was like, oh, armor on the cover. Ooh, what's this? Final Fantasy 12. Who's that in the center? Ended up becoming my favorite character. But I bought one for 10-2, and it had a really in-depth interview with Nomura about every single one of the dress sphere designs and like what he wanted to reflect with each character. And I think this is like super important. And it's a shame this interview isn't archived like anywhere, but when he was designing the outfits for Pain, Yuna, and Riku, he basically designed them based on the personality. So if you look at their white mage outfits, like Yuna is still very close-minded and conservative, so her hood is up and doesn't have the opening that Riku's has, because Riku is very open-minded and like interested in new things, and he thought it was very cool that he could sort of like have their personalities like reflect in their outfits in that way, which I thought was very cool.
Yeah, I don't know. It feels weird that Final Fantasy X-2 is largely the only Final Fantasy that did that in a series that's really become known for its fashion. Like, fashion is a huge part of like Final Fantasy character design, and it's just kind of weird that they haven't played around with that more, I guess.
I think it's because, again, like 10-2 use a lot of the same models and a lot of the same locations, and they were basically able to recycle a lot of those assets that they made. And you don't really see a lot of that on like a big scale anymore, as AAA games are trying to always do new cool things with new cool engines instead of just experimenting with what they already have. Again, Yakuza 7, I'll bring this up again. They literally said that, yeah, we're using the Dragon engine again because we're not going to waste all those assets that we ended up modeling and rendering. Yeah, they're going to be in the next game. Sorry if you're mad about it, but like, we're not going to switch to a new engine. We spent so much time on this. And I can really respect that from developers when they're like, no, like, we made this, it cost money, and like, we're going to use it.
Well, and also, to me, it's like the whole Red Dead Redemption and like open world games, and it's like, you made an entire open world to tell one story in. So why aren't you using that same world to tell a different story?
Exactly. It's, again, it's video games.
It's video games.
Anyways, on to international politics. And imperialism. As always. I'm always here to talk about imperialism. It's a reoccurring theme with me.
Oh gosh. We need to talk about not Final Fantasy V. Resident Evil 5 sometime.
Oh damn, yeah, the fucking yeah. Yeah, Western colonialism. White supremacy reflected in Albert Wesker's character design and ideology, whether or not Capcom wants to admit it.
Gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah. Okay. Anyways. Well, another time. We'll talk about it later. Anyways,
yeah, another time.
Okay. Anyways.
We'll talk later.
Anyways.
So Final Fantasy XII is a game that's not political. It's just about a fun adventure story.
Yeah, with my favorite...
a bunch of friends.
With my favorite non-political character, Vayne Solidor, and Bosch von Ronsenberg of Dalmasca.
Yep. Not political at all.
Absolutely not.
So can you like... I'm gonna give an attempt to kind of summarize the political landscape of Final Fantasy XII at like after the initial opening, which we will talk about in a bit. So essentially, there is
Arcades,
which is Arcades. Is the capital city also called Arcades?
It's just Arcades. Yeah.
Okay. So Arcades is up in the north, and it is a giant superpower. And then to the south, you have the Rosarians, who are also another giant superpower. And then kind of in the middle are a collection of smaller countries. And you have kingdoms, and I think they're all kingdoms.
It's Nabradia, which is a kingdom, and then Dalmasca is a kingdom, and then the Republic of Landis.
The Republic of Landis and that's Bujerba?
No, Bujerba's in the sky. Landis is... You literally go through the remains of Landis on your way north.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. That's where Nabudis is. Right?
It's around there. Around there. It's in the desert.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, but Bujerba's also in between those two, right?
It's up in the sky. It's not really in between. It's
Yeah, like it's not like up in the sky in between.
Yeah, it's
like
it's
if you
like
had,
it's like another
yeah.
it's another city state, basically another country.
Okay, so you have all of these, and Arcades basically declared war on Nebradia and took them over. And I don't know what happened to Landis. They don't talk about Landis that much, but I assume
so. What happened to Landis?
something similar.
Arcades was expanding, and they just ended up invading Landis and took Landis, and no one really helped Landis. You only really kind of know more about Landis if, one, you read the Ultimania, and two, you read the manga. And most people don't even know that there is a manga for Final Fantasy XII, but it actually expands on Bosch and Gabranth's character a lot, as well as like a couple of the other judges. And it kind of changes the context to some scenes. Like, you know, the opening cutscene where Bosch is like fighting at like Nabudis with Rassler and everything. He actually sees Drace there, and Drace is like, "Oh, like I'm not gonna fuck with you because there's somebody else that like wants to take your life, and I'm not gonna like, you know, keep him from doing that." And Bosch is like, huh? And he just like leaves. But
Perfect Bosch impression.
yeah, exactly. I not as Keith Ferguson-y as I'd like. Keith Ferguson has an amazing voice, and the voice cast of Final Fantasy XII is absolutely incredible. Most of these people don't even do voice work anymore. It was like a one-off thing. Like the voice actor for Vayne is actually like a Turkish actor, and he's only voiced in 12 and nothing else. Yeah.
Oh. Well, he did a really great job.
He's phenomenal. And he actually came back for Dissidia Final Fantasy NT, of all things. Like, he was there again.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, so like they kind of talk about Landis and like how like there had been pressure from Arcades, and there was even like the threat of an invasion looming, and everyone was like really tense, and eventually it just happened. And yeah, Landis got like completely just like destroyed, and all of the Landisians that decided to go with the Arcadians moved into the Arcadian slums, basically.
Okay. And then basically the same thing happened to Nebradia.
Yeah, Nebradia just got occupied as well, like taken over. Occupied.
And then the same thing happened to Dalmasca.
Dalmasca on more peaceful terms than the other two. Dalmasca was kind of like the one country that was like, okay, like, you know, take us over or whatever, occupy us so we can keep our sovereignty. But if you play the opening of Final Fantasy XII, you'll know this is a lie.
Yep.
But yeah, anyways, this podcast will go into spoilers. I'm sorry for anybody that wanted to go into this fresh. I apologize, because it really is a really great experience to go into fresh, because it does have a lot of really cool and interesting political intrigue.
Yeah.
But we will be talking about spoilers.
I do think, though, that after 145 episodes, our listeners probably know to expect spoilers.
You never know. You never know.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Spoilers, Bosch lips.
So, Arcades has taken over these three countries and has kind of grown to a halt, and then the intro that we see is like the intro cutscene is their main bulwark fortress of Nabudis falling, and the Prince Rassler being killed in battle, and Bosch takes his corpse back to the capital. And then basically the Dalmascan king is like, well, we have to surrender now to save our people. And so the king goes off to sign a treaty with the empire, and Bosch, in a startling turn of events at the end of a quick tutorial section, kills the character that you initially start the game as.
We'll use Bosch with quotation marks. It's pretty easy to tell it isn't Bosch. He has a completely different accent. And different colored eyes, too, so...
Yes.
Yeah.
Bosch, definitely Bosch, kills the king and everyone else who's there. And that's the opening of Final Fantasy XII. It's kind of definitely kind of a shocking opening. I would say
it goes fast. Like, you think you're gonna be playing wrestler and you're like out there to like, fight in the army to protect your brother and everything, and then like he's just gone. Well, not really gone. What ended up happening to him, for those of you that didn't read the manga or the
Do you
Ultimania.
mean Rex?
Oh, Rex, yeah, sorry. Rex and Wrestler look a lot alike, so does Vaughn. This is actually a plot point in the game. Sorry. Yeah, Rex, the main character, quote unquote, basically like gets tortured to the point that he is catonic and will not say anything anymore, and then just wastes away and dies. After this whole event, that's what happens. You only know about this very briefly through a scene, and in the manga, because like the manga kind of explains like why Vaughn is so beaten up about this and why he hates Bosch so much, is because like Rex wouldn't tell everyone that Bosch killed the king until they had tortured him to the point to where he just was like confessing and saying whatever they wanted him to. So just fun things.
Yeah, and so this kind of brings me to one of my first problems with Final Fantasy XII. It's that there's so much that's not in the game that would provide really important context.
Mm-hmm.
Like that. Like...
I mean, like, what I surmised before I read the manga, like, why he's in that state is maybe there was, like, so much trauma from, like, that betrayal and, like, the wound that he suffered that he was just, like, could not recover from it. That's, like, what I had assumed until I read the manga, and I was like, oh, okay, it's like that. I see.
Yeah, like, there's enough for you to, like, know what's going on, but you don't know the full implications of a lot of different things.
Mm-hmm. You're Vaughn. You're a child. Don't worry about it.
Honestly, that's kind of like a lot of the game, and we'll get to kind of the later stage stuff with like the Ocuria and stuff like that, where it's just like I would like to know more, please.
Mm-hmm.
But okay.
Well,
so
we should also say that this game is written by Matsuno, who has written all of the other Final Fantasy Tactics games for the most part, and this is part of the Ivalice Alliance series of games. So if you're not familiar with the Ivalice Alliance, you will probably want to play Final Fantasy Tactics, Advanced, all those games, even Vagrant Story, that's vaguely related to this game, Tactics Ogre, all these kinds of games. They all sort of intermingle, so for some context, you might want to look into those games as well. This game
also,
already has like a big history.
Vagrant Story is just absolutely beautiful for a PlayStation 1 game.
Yeah, it's breathtaking, honestly.
So that's kind of the intro, and it plays a lot with expectations, because initially you do kind of expect, like, oh, we're going to be playing as Lord Wrestler, and then he dies in the intro cutscene. You're like, oh, we're going to be playing as Bosch? And then
he's in prison for 2 years.
Well, then you play as Rex instead, and you're like, okay, we're going to be playing as Rex. And then Rex gets seemingly killed on screen. You're like, oh, okay, guess we're going to be playing as Vaughn, the guy who looks very similar to the two of the previous characters we thought we were going to be playing as. Mm-hmm. And Vaughn is just kind of I was about to say happy-go-lucky, but that's definitely like an affectation he has to like deal with his trauma.
Exactly. Yeah, he's a war orphan. His country has been colonized, and his parents died from an illness before the occupation. Yeah,
he is doing his best to cope under extreme circumstances.
Yeah.
And same with Penelo. I don't feel like they go super in depth with her, though.
No, they don't, unfortunately. Even in the manga, they don't really go in depth with her either. Other than the fact that she wants to be like a dancer, like that's like what she wants to do. But she hasn't had the opportunity because her parents also died, and now she is also an orphan, working alongside Vaughn and kind of like making sure he doesn't get into trouble. Him and Kites. She's kind of like the big sister.
And it's kind of unfortunate that that's like all her character.
Yeah, it is, because I really like Penelo, and I was hoping that they would kind of expand upon her more, but she's the character who you mostly see the Empire from, actually, because she gets, like, kidnapped and then Larsa's there, and he's like, no, she's my friend. And then, you know, she expresses, or she finally lets, like, Larsa, who is well-intentioned, know that, no, the Empire has, like, done bad things, and I am actually scared of the Empire. Something that he couldn't, like, really grasp before. But we're getting into a bunch of stuff, and there's, like, so much exposition to all of these events.
Okay, so let's take it section by section. So, we did the intro, and now it's Vaughn in Dalmasca, or Rabanastre, which is the capital city of Dalmasca. Mm-hmm. And Vaughn is just trying to live his life and decides that in order to get back at the Empire, he wants to sneak into the royal palace and reclaim some of the riches of Dalmasca for the people. And I feel like that's kind of the first section of the game, right?
That's after like the first tutorial. Like hour, basically, yeah.
So, yeah, it's an interesting time in the game. Like, we get to meet a lot of lower level, kind of the street people who live in under the occupation. Mm-hmm. It's and we get to see a lot of how occupation warps social norms and destroys bonds between people.
Mm-hmm. Like, even if you talk to NPCs early on in the game, a lot of them are like, oh, like, don't cause a fuss. Like, we know you like to cause a fuss, Vaughn, but, like, if you cause a fuss, they're gonna throw you into that dungeon and we'll never see you again. And a lot of people express fear, even for, like, saying anything that could potentially anger, like, the Empire. And, like, when Vane comes in and he's like, no, I want you to, like, think of me as your own and I want to be one with the people, everyone's like, oh, we don't trust you, but we can't, like, openly say it because, like, what if we die then? And who's gonna take care of my family? Like, the NPCs, the random NPCs in this game, like, they very, like, clearly express this fear, and they continue to express this fear because as you go through the game, you can go back and talk to NPCs and they will actually react to, like, events that have taken place, which I think is really cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a ton of writing in this game that you will miss if you do not talk to NPCs. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, like, we get introduced to Miguelo, who is sort of a kind-hearted businessman who has enough wealth to kind of provide protection for some of the citizens in Rabanastre.
He's the kind-hearted crocodile father.
Yeah, and he does also like kind of profit off of the labor of all of these war orphans and stuff. I'm unsure as to the extent of how good-hearted he is versus also a shrewd, like...
I don't think it's that sinister. I think that's reading too much into it, I think. Like, Miguelo is, like, a citizen of Dalmasca, and he's taking care of, like, orphans.
Okay.
That's, yeah.
I'm just trying to... It's been, like, dozens of hours since I played the opening of this game, so I'm just trying to make sure I get it all straight. So... Miguelo is one of the characters. Old Dalan, mm-hmm. Dalan is another character we get introduced to who's taking care of people in the Undercity because a lot of the non-wealthy Rabanastrans got shuffled into a giant underground prison area.
Yeah, to make room for all of the Arcadians coming into the city, basically.
Yeah, and also it's really disturbing. A couple of the NPCs are speculating about how, they're put all in one place so that, if they rise up, they can be killed much more easily. It's basically a ghetto / concentration camp. Which is not great. This is a heavy episode.
Yeah, Yeah, like there's a lot going on here. Like obviously, like a lot of Matsuno's works are very much like anti-imperialist. Just in general with a lot of the games that he chooses to write and a lot of the stories he chooses to tell, which I think is like really admirable considering like being anti-imperialist or having staunch anti-imperialist views in your media, like in your Japanese media specifically, can garner negative attention. And for example, like I know I talk about a lot about Japanese imperialism and how this relates to Japanese media, but I think it's important to bring up when a creator does have anti-imperialist message very clearly in their media. That's really important because of the LDP. We talked about the LDP before, which is the Japanese Left Democratic Party. And for those of you that don't know, the mangaka for Yu-Gi-Oh! Actually drew an illustration criticizing the Abe like regime, like his whole like time as prime minister and everything, and saying that being under the Abe administration is like living in the shadow realm. And the day he posted that, he had to take it down and make an apology to the LDP for saying that. So when a Japanese work goes out of its way to sort of criticize this sort of like establishment or system, I think it means a lot because you're not really allowed to say these things openly anymore, because you get silenced, or you even get dragged away from political rallies if you criticize Abe when he's like on his little political tour, which has been happening recently. That police have actually been grabbing people and silencing them, like actively silencing them, and dragging them to police stations and stuff. So Matsuno's works get really heavy, but obviously, like, these things need to be criticized in like great length.
And I think it's good to have that real world connection, because I think, especially when I played this game as a kid, I just didn't make that connection. Like, that this was supposed to be a commentary on the real world. Like, this is how things happen. Like, a foreign military power invades you and then dictates your life. And if you step out of line, you or the people you love get hurt. And that's basically what this first part of the game really establishes very well. Like a lot of living under this system encourages or necessitates like bribery of these powerful, like even low level people can completely ruin you if they decide to.
Absolutely.
And like it's within their power, it's within their occupational quote unquote right. So like Miguelo, you see him I think a couple of times bribing soldiers to get Vaughn and Pinello out of trouble.
Yeah, like he even like because Vaughn wants to get in and they're not gonna let him back into the city because he was running an errand and he like ran off. He literally has to bribe like one of the guards to like let Vaughn into the city instead of like keeping him out there.
It's an interesting scene too. It's really well written because even with the bribe, Miguelo has to kind of degrade himself and the bribe. Like he talks about like, oh, it's this liquor is inferior to your Arcadian variety, but once you get used to it, it's pretty good. Like it's just kind of that, like making sure that the people in power feel like they're in power, because that's the most important thing to surviving underneath that sort of an occupation.
Yeah, like again, this game conveys a lot of that really well, and of course, like my favorite characters in this, like they're basically two characters that have had their entire lives shifted because of like the Arcadian occupation and like the destruction of their homeland and like what that has actively made them. And I think again the game tells the story really well, although sometimes really subtly. Like I talked about this on stream actually regarding like one of the lines said in game and about like the sort of xenophobia and racism in Arcades that's even like directed towards like the Hume group of people, that Arcadians are essentially purists and they only want people of Arcadian blood within Arcadian high society, and if you're anything else you'll still be an outsider to them no matter how much you commit or perform their sort of imperialism within their own society. You will always be labeled an outsider for that. And I
Yeah.
think these
Um,
discussions about racism or xenophobia and race and everything in video games could benefit from having this reflected against people that look human versus again like my this half elven character is facing fantasy racism, which is an allegory for real racism, but people can obviously arguably like separate that from being like the real world in the fantasy that they're currently playing or reading about.
mhm.
And again, like the fact that this game like sort of chooses to like be like no, like there is this sort of like purity or sort of idea or imperial standard that this city has otherwise like set for its citizens, that even people who do look, you know, human or whatever, are not allowed to prescribe to if they are anything other than Arcadian.
Right. And I think, and it's interesting to see that also being weaponized against the people who are under occupation, because that's exactly what Vane Solidor does when he rolls into town, and he, um, in a kind of, I would hazard to guess a rehearsed moment, he steps off of his podium while giving kind of his like, "Hi, I'm your new like
I'm your new imperial,
governor."
yeah, governor basically. And I'm just like you people, and like again like the wariness reflected in Vaughn and Penelo when he's there, and like Penelo like even in that small cutscene like she grabs Vaughn's arm because like she's scared, you know, like this scares people, and then the NPCs you talk to afterwards are like, oh, that was obviously fake, like he's full of shit, like he's just like the
Right.
other ones, you know, like again like it's very rehearsed, but it's, you
Like
know.
it's weird because the cutscene. I'm wondering your take on the cutscene, because like a lot of people start clapping, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
wondering if you think that that is like them believing or wanting to believe him, after 2 years of occupation, uh, or is it them meeting his expectations so they aren't punished?
Well, at first I thought it was them accepting him because I was like, oh, people are clapping. Like, maybe Vane isn't that bad. You know, like what the game wants you to think.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe Vane isn't this horrible, fucked up, you know, like Imperial or whatever. Maybe he is trying to do something better for the people. But then after reading all of the NPC dialogue after that, it's very clear that this like, you know, you're performing, you're behaving in the way that the Imperials or like the occupying force like wants you to behave, you know? And I think a lot of people who come from diasporas um, of countries that have suffered like Western colonialism or Japanese imperialism will definitely understand that sentiment if like these things have been told to them by their parents and their grandparents, because again like colonialism still happens and is currently happening in various countries around the world. And of
Oh
course
yeah.
like yeah, and of course like people will have to perform regardless of how they truly feel in order to survive, and I feel like that moment is actually one of those moments where people are more or less performing for the sake of like the approval of like their new leader versus how they actually feel. But again, it's you have to read the NPC dialogue after that cutscene to get that, or you're gonna miss it, which I think is a shame.
Right. um and like you said, like I think because honestly, I think because the word is colonialism, and we tend to think of colonies and empires as being, I mean, at least from like a united, like a perspective rooted in the United States, I think a lot of people think that colonies and empire are things that ended like 200 years ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important to know that colonialism as a force and empire at work in our modern world are still very much alive and well. Like, the United States has an empire, like, across the world.
Mm-hmm.
We have military bases in quite a few countries, and it's worth it's worth maybe considering why that is, um, and kind of the ramifications of what that means, and even just recent history with like the invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq,
Mm-hmm.
and the fact that we are still there in both of those places, dictating their domestic policy. And this is a game that I think once you have the lens that we're kind of talking about in this episode, helps you to see our real world more accurately.
Oh, yeah, I
and
absolutely agree.
better.
Yeah.
Sorry, I needed to make that detour of a
No,
point.
that's really important, because I do think a lot of people kind of forget that, no, these things happen, like, and have happened recently. People like to assume that all of, like, I don't know, again, for example, like, Japanese imperialism was something that happened, like, hundreds of years ago, when, no, like, South Korea and North Korea were under Japanese imperial rule, like, not even, like, what, like, 50 something years ago, and there are still people, like, still feeling that effect. Like, this isn't something distant. This isn't something that's just made up or put in a fantasy world. This is real stuff. And, like, this game is actually discussing this in, like, great detail. And I know it can be maybe difficult for people to see or to understand because of, like, the set dressing and everything. But again, like, a lot of these works that Matsuno writes are very much inspired by the events of, like, actual wars and, like, actual things that have happened in history. And I think that's really important to note. And again, like, it's worth noting that all media is inherently political, especially Final Fantasy XII and Final Fantasy as a franchise, I think. And this game, again, chooses to tackle that head on. Like, this game is literally about, like, overthrowing an imperial occupation and, like, basically destroying Vane's own sort of manifest destiny that he has decided for himself, like, and put to force at the end of the game, you know?
Yeah. And I guess I just wanted to add that I had a thought. I totally lost it.
It'll come back to you.
It will, and it will be very irritating. But yeah, basically this. Oh, I got it. Haha. One of the things from I'm as I get older, I'm more and more plugged into politics, just both in general and also domestic politics in the United States. And one of the things that has stuck with me over the years is political commentators discussing why do people in the Middle East hate the United States? And A, that's a big brush to paint with, but B, the answer that someone gave, and this just haunts me, is they hate us because they hate us. And I think that this game is the perfect refutation of that. Because when you are under occupation, you can't act as equals. And that's going to create conflict and stewing, long-lasting resentment, and we see in this game, like, the people who have been under occupation have a lot to struggle with, and recover from, and they don't hate, like, people under occupation don't hate the occupiers because they hate the occupiers. They hate the occupiers for occupying their land and dictating to them what they have to do.
And mistreating their people.
Or else. Right. And so it's frustrating that so many people in positions to communicate kind of how things actually are spread that kind of misinformation and propaganda to justify imperialist actions. Anyway, sorry.
No, it's okay.
Tangent done.
I mean, like, that's kind of like the crux of what we're talking about, though, with this game, right? And, like, what it sort of embodies, and, like, what it criticizes, like, so aptly, I think. Like, everything that this game sort of represents. Like, again, like, Final Fantasy XII is a really heavy game. It's a really dense game. But, again, if you're looking for a game that actively criticizes these institutions, then you should definitely try it out and play it. because it is like a really, really good game just for that alone. I think like the gameplay might not gel and everything, but at the end, I think its political message is like very clear, and I think it's a good one.
Mm-hmm.
At least it actually says something and doesn't paint imperial forces as being victims to their own imperialism. And that's all I'm going to say about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
We really like did that was a really good like end for that, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
honestly, we've been talking for an hour already.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, you know, honestly, the last time we talked about Final Fantasy, we went for about 2 hours or more.
And we didn't even like cover everything with that. Like that was that in itself
that was
such a
4
layered
MMOs in one episode.
Like, and it's such a layered conversation again with like Japanese politics and why people were angry and like why people should take this into consideration and like why some things are like full of shit, you know, that kind of stuff. Like it had to be dense and it had to be that long. This, on the other hand, again, people should definitely play it and definitely let us know how you felt about it if you decided to play it and what your feedback is and how it made you feel or what you saw in the game, because I'd love to hear what other people see in Final Fantasy XII. Like for me especially, like this game resonated with me so deeply as someone who was like biracial and has like at one point in their life so desperately tried to conform to one identity or the other to find like some sort of inner peace, as I felt like so lost and angry during segments of my life, that I think this game and its different characters, I think it has the ability to resonate with people in a lot of very different ways and a lot of really cool ways even.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what your timeline looks like for like recording and stuff, but I would love to do like a part 2, like if you wanted to keep talking about it, because we haven't even made it through the first couple hours of this game.
Oh yeah, no, I would absolutely be down to talking to this for part 2. And then we can talk about the characters, and then everyone has to listen to me talk about Gabranth for 2 hours.
Do you want to do that now? I don't know what your
I'm
schedule
free,
looks
yeah,
like.
I'm free.
All right.
Yeah.
Then we will continue this in part 2.
Yeah, part 2. See everybody then.